Alec Murdaugh was a very successful lawyer, earning 7 figures a year. He was a partner with the most prominent law firm in the Low Country of South Carolina, PMP E&D, with the M standing for Murdaugh. His family life was just as successful. He had a wife, Maggie, and together they raised 2 boys, Buster and Paul, on their multi-million-dollar properties. From the outside, it seemed ideal. It seemed like Alec had everything a man could want. But all of that changed on June 7th, 2021, when Maggie and Paul were shot to death on their family property with 2 different guns within moments of each other. Paul was shot in the face and chest with a 12-gauge shotgun, and Maggie was hunted down with an AR-style rifle. Who and why then became the 2 biggest questions connected to this mystery. The first question was answered after a few months when prosecutors arrested Alec for the double murder. It seemed somewhat logical that the last known person to be with the victims ends up being charged. But what doesn't make a lot of sense is why. Why would a father execute his wife and son in such a violent manner? Tonight, we are live from the Low Country with the latest from the courtroom as prosecutors attempt to answer that question for the men and women of the jury.
Welcome to Closing Arguments. I'm Vinny Politan. We are live at Fat Jack's in Walterboro, South Carolina, the small town hosting this really big trial. Great to have you with us. Another big day inside the courtroom, another packed house here at Fat Jack's. Everyone's talking about this case. And when I think of an investigation into a mystery, when the call comes in, right, when the first headline is read that someone was murdered, the 2 things I think about are the same 2 things that one of my favorite detectives from TV thinks about, Briscoe from Law and Order. He would always say in every episode, what's the motive? Motive and opportunity. Opportunity and motive. Who had an opportunity to commit the murder? Who had a motive to commit the murder? That's how they get to the accused killer. That's the road. You figure out, well, who could have been there and who had a reason to kill the victims. It's obvious, but it's not obvious when you're trying to figure out who did it. But those are the questions you have to answer. And when it comes to opportunity, it's pretty simple, right? Who could have been there? But motive gets a little more complicated. And classic motives involving sex, lies, money, we see them all the time on CourtTV. You know, somebody's cheating on somebody, somebody's jealous of somebody, somebody's stealing money from someone. I mean, those are classic motives. It's not a justification for a murder, but it's a reason why someone would commit the unthinkable and take someone else's life. Now, in this case, if we begin with Alec Murdaugh and we take a look at opportunity, that's crystal clear. I mean, through the words of Alec Murdaugh himself, that he was there on the family property where the murders took place. Now, he may not admit being there at the time of the murders or the exact time of the murders, and the defense is doing everything they can to squeeze that window so the opportunity wouldn't exist for Alec Murdaugh to commit the murder. You squeeze the timeline, less of an opportunity. But obviously, prosecutors say there was clearly enough time, especially since what we saw yesterday, which was the video of the dogs with the audio of Alec there just moments before the phones go dead for Paul and Maggie, which is the time prosecutors believe that they were murdered. Now, let's get to the motive. What possible motive would Alec Murdaugh have to kill his family, specifically his son, to shoot his son in the face with a shotgun and then grab an AR and chase and hunt down his wife? Like, you don't have to prove it, right? Legally, prosecutors never have to prove a motive. It's not an element of the crime. You don't need to demonstrate why someone did it beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not required. The judge will tell the jury that. The prosecutor, I hope, will remind the jury that. But in a case like this, a case where you're accusing a man of shooting his son, killing his wife, hunting her down like an animal, and just blowing his brains all over the dog kennel, he better give him a reason, something that's plausible, something that, okay, a jury can say, I get it. I don't agree with it. It's not a reason to kill him, but I can understand what was going on in the mind of this accused killer. Because that's why it's so difficult for prosecutors and why they don't have to prove it, is because you literally have to get inside someone's mind and figure out what they were thinking. Unless they say it to someone, which is rare, and it's not the case in this case, because he says he didn't even do it. So today, inside the courtroom, it really became the center focus of everything, as the prosecutor is fighting to get evidence in front of this jury that they believe proves motive. Part of that motive is about something that happened not here at this courthouse, but in a different town, in a different county, and we hit the road once again. The Murdaugh trial is taking place in Colton County in Walterboro. That's where we've been staying, but today we're heading out of Colton County. We're going somewhere else because prosecutors say on the day of the murders, what happened in Hampton County, where we're going now, is what led to what happened that night when Maggie and Paul were shot to death. What happened behind the walls in this building on June 7th, according to prosecutors, led to the murders of Maggie and Paul. This building is the law firm where Alec Murdaugh worked, the law firm where he was a partner, PMPED. Now, I'm going to get to what happened behind those walls, but let me give you a little history first of this building and this law firm. Alec's great-grandfather founded the firm in 1910, and he started this incredible personal injury practice. And it all started, there was a train accident in front of his home, one of his first big clients, one of his first big cases, and from there, through the years, the law firm grew. And if you look on the front, there's no name of the firm. That's how powerful and how influential and how well-known they are. Now, let's get back to June 7th. On that day, Alec Murdaugh was confronted by an accountant, a bookkeeper inside that law firm about some missing money, $700,000. You see, Alec was a partner of this firm. So partners are supposed to, when they make money, run it through the law firm, because some goes to the firm, some gets divided amongst the partners. And then you get paid at the end of the year. But according to prosecutors, to circumvent all of that, to get the money in his hands quicker and get more money in his hands quicker, they say Alec was settling a case and taking the money and not letting his partners know about it. Well, he was confronted on the 7th, and they say that confrontation was a day of reckoning for Alec Murdaugh, a day where he had to divert everyone's attention away from his financial misdeeds inside this law firm onto something else. And the murders of Maggie and Paul did that.
All right. On June 7th, did the issue come back to a head?
The issue did come back to heads.
Just to be clear, this is June 7th, 2021.
Yes.
And how much were these fees supposed to be, did you know?
$792,000 in total.
And to this point, the firm had not received those fees, is that correct?
That's correct.
And Chris Wilson's office is saying initially, we already dispersed them.
Yes. And Chris Wilson's not saying anything to me.
Was, to your knowledge, was an inquiry made to Chris Wilson at that time?
Lee Cope, we had not inquired Chris Wilson other than requesting this information at this point in time.
All right. So tell me about June 7th. How does that go?
So on June 7th, I was going to make another run at finding out from Alec if we had their information. I went upstairs to his office is on the second floor, and he was leaning on a file cabinet outside his office. And he turned and looked at me when I came up and said, "What do you need now?" And gave me a very dirty look, not a look that I'd ever received from Alec, just kind of frustrated with me look, which made me go, "Oh, you want to know? Let's go in your office." So we went in the office and closed the door, and at that point, I told him that I had reason to believe that he had received the funds himself and that I needed proof that he had not.
received those fees himself.
Yes.
And I needed proof that they're not.
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He told me again, that he assured me that the money was there and that he could get it. And at that point, I said, I'm just trying to do my job, and if I don't get this paperwork and verify that with these questions, I'm not doing my job. He actually acted like he respected that, and again said that that money was there, and that he, again, was trying to decide what he was going to be doing with it.
And did y'all get to conclude that conversation, or just something interrupted?
We did not. He took a phone call in the middle of that conversation. That phone call was about his father who was in the hospital, that he was going to be terminal, and that there was nothing else they'd be able to do for his father. So that changed the mood of the conversation. We quit talking about business, and I immediately asked about him and his family and his dad, and, you know, we got talking as friends at that point, concern over the family. And after that, I shortly left, so it briefed and cut down the conversation.
All right. You'd come in there asking for proof where that money was, because you had reason to believe he took it, and then the conversation ultimately got short by the call about his father.
Yes.
When did you find out about the murders?
I initially found out through the rumor mill around 10:30 or 11 o'clock the evening of them, but I did not get confirmation until I received a text from the partner roughly 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
The day of reckoning, that was the theme. But here's the catch. All this testimony, jury hasn't heard it yet. All of this taking place outside the presence of the jury. This is what prosecutors want the jury to hear. The defense absolutely does not want them to hear it, because it paints Alec Murdaugh in a much different light, right? This is a guy who's cheating his partners, maybe cheating his clients and everybody else. I mean, someone who does all that might be a little more likely to commit a double murder. All right, time to bring in our guest. Joining me, CourtTV legal correspondent Chanley Painter. We've got criminal defense attorney Lori Murray, both with us here at Fat Jack's. And joining us remotely tonight, because maybe he didn't pay his tab last night. He's not allowed back in. Matt Harris, host of the Murdaugh Family Murders, Impact of Influence, joining us remotely. Great to see you, Matt. All right, Chanley, so explain to us, put some context in what happened today inside that courtroom relative to all this type of testimony.
Right, so the jury showed up, and the judge wanted to take up this motion outside of the jurors' presence. Well, they had one short witness, so they gave them an extended break, basically until lunch, Vinny, and they took up the witnesses that the prosecutor wants to introduce in front of the jury, but the judge has to consider it before making the decision whether or not the jury will hear this evidence. So that's what happened for most of the day. We heard from Jeannie Seconder, the CFO of Parker Law Group and PMPD, as well as Chris Wilson, the head of Forge Consulting, several witnesses in his determination, which he hasn't decided yet.
Right, so all of this, what's the point that the prosecution's trying to make with all of these witnesses and this evidence?
Well, they have a motion where they want to introduce this evidence of alleged financial crimes as a motive. Remember, the perfect storm was brewing in Murdaugh's life. He said that in opening statement. Creighton Waters did. And they want to use this to show that this was the reckoning. It was all crumbling in that day, June 7th, 2021. And in order to delay and prevent the inevitable, he went to the extreme, killed his wife and son.
Lori, this is unusual motive evidence, but this is an unusual life and a circumstance that this man has found himself in at this point. June 7th, his world is starting to crumble.
Well, not only is his world starting to crumble because of the financial status of the law firm and them starting to find out about him stealing money from the firm, it's also crumbling from the boating accident, because remember, there's a hearing that's scheduled the following week that is directly related to his financial status. That they
now, when you say boating accident, that's the accident where his son is accused of steering a boat into a dock, flipping it or whatever, killing Mallory Beach, and they're being sued, and Alec's being sued, his son's being sued. So this is creating another problem.
This is a big, huge problem. This is probably the start of the problem, because, and think about the fact that Paul caused this problem. So Paul caused this problem. They've been trying to get financial records because there are punitive damages at issue in this case. And there was a hearing because Alec refused to turn over his financial records. So there was a hearing scheduled for the following week to determine, and it's like a motion to compel him to turn over those records.
So it's It's a coincidence, sort of, right? That all of a sudden the law firm is figuring some stuff out at the same time that there's some sort of a reckoning for the boating accident. So, Matt, we look at all of these things happening in Alec Murdaugh's life. I also heard testimony today about him, you know, making 7 figures. 7 figures, $1 million down here. I think you can live a good life.
Yeah, you can live a real good life. It's still amazing to me that it's $8 to $9 to $10 million over 10 years that he took, and then he has his salary and his bonuses and all that on top of it. So where that all went, it's still a question to a lot of people. I think the defense made a little bit of inroads when they were saying, hey, Alec has gotten away with this forever. His world has been crumbling, and he always pulls a rabbit out of the hat. Why would this be any different? He just knows that he's going to find that money. He's going to work it out. It's not an emergency to Alec Murdaugh. He's been pushing the limits for a long time, and he doesn't need to panic. That's what the defense is painting the picture of.
Yeah, let me tell you, though, once your partners find out that you're doing something a little funny, that becomes a little more difficult to kick down the road. But
yeah,
we shall see. The judge has to make a big decision on this. We've got more testimony relative to all this. So important in this case because it's all about the question, why? Why would Alec Murdaugh do this? It is the unthinkable type crime. This isn't your typical spousal murder. He took out his son and his wife in a brutal, brutal fashion. All right, we've got a lot more to cover tonight. We are live at Fat Jack's in Walterboro, South Carolina, bringing you all the big moments from inside the courtroom.
All fees earned should come through payable to PMPD.
And so if a lawyer earns fees, is it appropriate at all for those fees to go directly to the lawyer as opposed to going through the law firm?
No.
Is that a hard rule to understand?
No.
Anybody ever have a problem with that rule or not understand it?
No.
Pretty easy and hard and fast rule in that firm, correct?
That's right.
If you get the money written straight to you, what is that?
The money's taken straight to you?
Yeah.
That would be stealing it.
The life of Alec Murdaugh is bizarre. It is complicated.
This great South Carolina attorney is charged with the murders of his own wife and son.
Okay, and are they breathing? No, ma'am.
Who exactly is this guy?
The evidence is going to show that he was there.
He is innocent.
Who knows where this thing is going to end?
This case needs to be resolved. We need to put this behind us and move on.
Murdaugh Family Murders. Live coverage weekday mornings, only on CourtTV.
Conceded that we needed to talk to Alec, that it looked like he had stolen
What's the total amount?
$2,841,512.55. And it is my understanding that Alec admitted it and that it was determined he would resign.
Financial shenanigans. That's the picture that's being painted by prosecutors in front of the judge. Jury hasn't heard this yet. They want to get this stuff in front of the jury. And think about this. You're Alec Murdaugh, right? You're a guy who comes from this big family name. You've lived a privileged life. You've always had money. You're the center focus when you walk into a room. Everybody knows you got cash. You're living a great life. And all of that could be revealed, that it's all fake, that you're in debt, that you're burning through money, that you're stealing from clients, that you're siphoning money from your law firm. All of that is coming to a head. And that's what prosecutors are saying is the reason why he wanted to divert everyone's attention away from that. No, don't look at the money I was stealing. Look over here. My wife and my son, they were shot and killed. They were murdered. That's the plan, according to prosecutors. Take a listen now. We'll take some more of this testimony today inside the courtroom involving what I'm calling the financial shenanigans of Alec Murdaugh.
I decided to print a ledger printout of our system of payments to Forge. And as I did that, I started printing all the documents that would relate to those disbursements, the disbursement statements and the canceled checks. And as I started printing the canceled checks off, I could see Bank of America on the back and Alec Murdaugh's signature. And everyone that came out was just put it a little bit more in the grave for me.
Once you started printing out all those Forge ones that had Alec's writing on it in Bank of America, and you contacted Forge, did you ask them whether or not they ever banked the real Forge, if they ever banked a Bank of America?
Lee Cope had that conversation, and Michael Gunn verified that they had not banked there in a number of years.
Did he ask you about any banking that Forge Consulting LLC did?
He did.
And what was his question to you?
He asked me if we banked with Bank of America.
And what was your response?
I told him that we had banked with Bank of America, but had not for the last 3 or 4 years.
What did you find out?
I spoke with Lee Cope, and he told me that Alex had been using an account called Forge to process the checks.
Is that account that he had been using, is that a legitimate Forge Consulting account?
Absolutely not.
Did any of that money that went into that account go to legitimate Forge?
No, sir.
Did Forge Consulting have anything to do with that particular account?
No, sir.
And do you know the defendant?
I do.
And did you know the defendant?
I've known Alex since we were in high school. He was one of my best friends, yes.
No, sir.
Did Forge Consulting have anything to do with that particular account?
No, sir.
And do you know the defendant?
I do.
And when did you get to know the defendant?
I've known Alex since we were in high school. He was one of my best friends, yes. And I thought, you know, he was, and I thought he felt the same way about me.
Feel that way now?
I don't know how I feel now, Mr. Waters.
Fair enough.
He said he would try to meet with me the next morning, and that he was sorry. First thing I asked him was, you know, Alec, what the is going on here? You know, what is going on? And have you done something else to me or that involves me that I don't know about? Because I know about this, and I've got to deal with this. But is there something else you've done that I don't know about that I need to be concerned with?
And what did he say?
He broke down crying. Said I can't right this second. He went inside, came back out with some paper towels, and told me that he had a drug problem, that he was addicted to opioids, and that he had been addicted for, I don't remember if he said 20 or 20 plus years, but you know, for 20 years or so.
Did he say anything about the money?
He told me that he had been stealing money.
Did he have a particular phrase about what he had done to you?
Me up.
Said he you up?
Me up or off or something like that, but I think it was he me up.
He said that he admitted to you he had been stealing client money?
Yes, sir.
Said so he confessed that to you, is that correct?
He said he had a lot of people up.
That last witness, Chris Wilson, if he ends up testifying in front of this jury, look out, because this was like his best friend. You're ripping off your best friend, too? Who rips off their best friend? Is that someone who's more likely or less likely to commit murder? Let's bring back in our guests. Chanley Painter's still with us. Laurie Murray, Matt Harris is with us, and Joseph Scott Morgan joining the show. Professor of Forensics at Jacksonville State University, former senior investigator for Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, and of course the host of the Body Bags podcast. Great to see you. All right, Chanley, let me start with you first. How do we get to where we are right now? How do we get here?
Well, we know we have this motion from the prosecutors, right? We're going to argue this, but they have to put forth some sort of evidence before the judge can make a decision. But we actually kind of got started on this yesterday afternoon inside the courtroom because on the cross-examination of one of the key witnesses for the state, the best friend of Paul Murdaugh, the victim, the defense decided to allegedly, according to the judge, open the door to some of these issues. Let's watch.
Do you remember in early 2019 that Paul was in a boating accident?
Yes, sir.
And a beautiful young woman died in that accident, didn't they?
Yes, sir.
Her name was Mallory Beach.
That's correct.
And Paul was eventually charged. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did Paul receive any threats or harassments that you knew about as a result of that boating accident?
None that I thought was real serious. I mean, he mentioned it that, you know, he'd get people comment about it, but nothing that I thought was real serious.
So he's asking about the boat crash, what this witness knows about the boat crash.
Right.
And then later asked, Alec, do you know of any reason why he would want to murder his wife and son? And he says, no, absolutely not. Well, then the prosecutor had this to say. Let's watch.
And one of the issues that's still outstanding is issues of the financial motives that exist. The defense, through their questioning, has opened the door to that.
I think we said, are there any circumstance under which you know that he might kill Paul and Maggie? And he said no. That didn't open the door to any financial crime that he may have committed.
Well, the judge disagreed, Vinny, and said that the defense did open the door. He overruled the objections yesterday. Now he's taking up this matter outside the presence of the jury. It's a 404B rule, you know, prior bad acts and crimes. And
so anytime you hear open the door, that sounds like a potential mistake made by the defense. Maybe not in their eyes, but in the eyes of the judge. Joseph Scott Morgan, let me ask you about this in general. You've investigated so many homicides. Motive, have you ever seen or heard of a motive quite like this? A guy is jammed up in his financial life, and it looks like everything's going to get revealed. So to divert everyone's attention, he shoots his son in the face with a shotgun and then hunts down his wife with an AR.
Not to this extent. You know, generally with familial homicides, you'll have a very violent act, and of course, we've covered many cases like that. But here's my thing, Vin, with this theme that we're running with right now, and I think it's a salient point. From an investigative standpoint, I'm not a big fan, particularly from a scientific standpoint, of why. But when I show up to a scene and it is this involved, I want to know, is this a frenzied attack? Is this something that looked like a lot of planning went into? And the reason that's important, I think, given this idea that they're putting forth about finances, is this something that instantaneously set this thing off in him where he decided to get a couple of weapons and hell followed soon thereafter? Or is this something that took days, weeks, planning up to that point? And, you know, maybe you see evidence of that in the scene if you're trying to read the scene and profile who actually did this, because, you know, they put out a couple of theories here that possibly there was more than one person involved.
Oh, absolutely. Defense going there big time. Lori, let me ask you about that. It's a great point. Joseph Scott Morgan always making great points, by the way. Looking at this, what's the feeling you're getting from the evidence so far? Does this strike you as something that was a planned and plotted murder, or something that maybe was more of a passion, heat of the moment, something happens and somebody snaps?
Well, I think when you look at the crime scene itself, I think that makes it look like somebody snapped. I think that it's very violent. I don't think a father or anybody else could do something that violent and have that planned. And obviously the gun didn't have the same kind of bullets in it. They weren't ready. But when you look at the timeline and how narrow that is and how everything seemed to fall directly into place to make this timeline work, then I think that we have a planned murder.
You know, Matt, that's another part of all this, right? This case, investigators, prosecutors believe they've solved it, but until you get a conviction, the case is not over. This is not an overwhelming case. So what does that tell you about looking at the facts surrounding this? You know, you get the feel that this is something that is planned and plotted over the course of days and weeks, or something that is like all of a sudden it's just too much and boom, there's a moment, there's an opportunity, and somebody loses it.
Well, it wouldn't make sense that if the theory is that he saw it crumbling that morning, then he wouldn't have thought about planning it. So it would have had to have happened that day. And then if I'm the jury, I'm like, well, what would make him snap? He was having fun with his kid in the Snapchat video. He was talking to the dog. Everything seemed fine. And then there's this video ends, and in 3 minutes, he loses it, snaps, grabs a gun, shoots his son in the head, starts chasing his wife, and then shoots her a bunch of times, and then puts the gun into her head. I think that is something that the state is going to have to work on. That's their big thing to overcome. And the timeline is the huge thing for the defense to overcome, right? Those are the biggies.
Absolutely. All right, we've got all the biggies here. Great guest. We are live at Fat Jack's. When we come back, another big question about Maggie. Was she lured back to the home? Because she wasn't there that day. She was at their beach house. We'll take a look at some of that evidence, because that gets to the same issue. Was this something that was planned and plotted? Will the jury believe that? We'll talk about it next.
She was a great mom. She didn't work. And she always said it was her job since she was privileged enough not to work. She was going to make sure she took care of me and the boys. And I mean, she did everything. She did absolutely everything.
That's Alec Murdaugh in his second police interview, talking there about his wife, Maggie. Now, clearly emotional. If the jury believes that, that is a big win for the defense. And again, getting back to this whole thing about motive, like if he really loved her, would he really hunt her down with an AR just because his financial world was blowing up? You know, isn't it like you and me, babe? You know, whether or not we're rich or poor, for richer or poorer, you're going to stay with me, you're going to be with me. So why would he kill her? I mean, that's what the defense is going to argue. Prosecution going in a different direction. And it seems that money might be more important than anything else to Alec Murdaugh. Now, the question, Maggie, the night she was murdered, early in the day, she wasn't there. She was at the other home at the beach. So a big question in this case is whether or not she was lured back to the lodge house where she was murdered. Was this all planned and plotted by Alec Murdaugh? Take a listen here, because in this part of the testimony about some text messages, we find out why she left the beach house.
All right, and that's 3:55 in the afternoon, correct?
Yes, sir.
Of June 7th, correct?
Yes, sir. That's in the afternoon. You subtract 4.
All right, read that text, please.
It says, T.Y., I'm waiting at doctor. Alex wants me to come home.
Alex what?
Wants me to come home. I had to leave door open at Edisto, but trust Mexicans to shut and lock for me. His dad is back in hospital. The last doctor claims no cancer, it's pneumonia. And there's some emojis and it says Alex, but I'm not sure if that's going into the next thread or not.
Okay, I don't know if prosecutors are going to argue this. We still have our guests with us, Chanley Painter, CourtTV legal correspondent, Lori Murray, criminal defense attorney, Matt Harris, podcaster, Impact of Influence, and Joseph Scott Morgan, who does it all, right? Investigator, podcaster. All right, Chanley, what, Maggie coming back there, is it going to be an allegation that she's lured to the site of the murder, that Alec wants her back there?
We haven't heard that yet from prosecutors. They may argue that at the end of the day, but it sounds like, based on her text messages, that because of Alec's father's condition, being placed in hospice near death, that's why she wanted to come back and be with Alec, make sure Alec is okay, sounds like. So that's all we know so far, Vinny. But again, there's a lot we don't know.
There is. Matt, what are your thoughts here on this concept that Alec Murdaugh is planning this whole thing, so he's got to get Maggie back to the house so he can kill her?
Chanley, of course, is always right. It's not really totally revealed in those texts. There was all these reports and rumors, and using the word Lord is obviously a very inflammatory word right there. But she says that he wants me to come back to Moselle. She's at a doctor's appointment. At one point, there's a text about her getting a pedicure. There's no text that's been revealed yet that says, like, Alex is begging me, or Alex is up to something, or Alec is really weird tonight. It's just him, in what we've seen so far, just suggesting to her that he hopes that she'll come home because he's really tired and he's upset about his dad, who that day went to the hospital in Savannah.
So, Lori, that doesn't, I mean, these circumstances don't necessarily suggest a master plan if she's coming back because he doesn't control whether his father gets ill and is put in hospice.
No, he doesn't, but he had been put in hospice, and she knew that. There were rumors flying everywhere when this case first broke that she had been lured back.
There's a lot of rumors down here in the Low Country, let me tell you.
That's what we're known for. But I've seen nothing. I've seen no witnesses. I've seen no proof. I've seen absolutely nothing. Heard no testimony. Heard nothing in the opening that he lured her. Surely the prosecution would have mentioned that if he lured her there. I think she was truly coming back to have dinner with the family. She called ahead to make sure that Blanca had fixed the dinner on time. She was coming back after her doctor's appointment, after her pedicure, and I don't think there's any evidence of her being lured back.
Yeah, Joseph Scott Morgan, this paints a picture that is kind of similar with some of these other family moments we've seen, right? Your father-in-law is sick, so you're going to go home to be with your husband. It doesn't strike me that there's marital problems or any sort of stress here between Maggie and Alec.
No, it doesn't. But can I throw another word in here? Or maybe, yeah, just one. I don't want to use the word lured or baited or trapped. I want to use the word opportunistic. And, you know, that's something that we look at in crimes, particularly when we're talking about homicides, and you're looking for an opening in order to perpetrate this. Keep in mind, you know, people have named them as like benevolent kings. I don't know who they ought to copyright that phrase. I don't know who did that. They've talked about that family in this sense. He's the king of this kingdom there, particularly at that property. He controls then that environment at all moments. He knows the ins and outs. It's vast, man. You drove by it. You're not going to hear peep out there. He couldn't have perpetrated this at the beach house, all right, like he could have here if he did this. He has complete and total control. It was an opportunistic event, perhaps. But you're not going to hear peep out. He's the king of this kingdom there, particularly at that property. He controls then that environment at all moments. He knows the ins and outs. It's vast, man. You drove by it. You're not going to hear peep out there. He couldn't have perpetrated this at the beach house, all right, like he could have here if he did this. He has complete and total control. It was an opportunistic event, perhaps. Man, you drove by it. You're not going to hear peep out there. He couldn't have perpetrated this at the beach house, all right, like he could have here if he did this. He has complete and total control. It was an opportunistic event, perhaps.
Great argument to make during closings. All right, guests are staying with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the blood evidence or lack of blood evidence, all that. We are live at Fat Jack's covering this big trial in this small town.
Clean.
Is the individual you described as clean from head to toe in this courtroom?
Yes, he is. Everybody was a suspect at that point.
Including Al.
Including Al.
Alec Murdaugh was clean, but was he too clean? That may be the argument by prosecutors at the end of this whole case, is that he's just too clean to come upon a scene of his wife and son all bloodied up and then not have any blood on him. Like, wouldn't you like go down and you know, jostle them, see if they're awake? Maybe you'd cry, maybe you'd faint, maybe you'd do everything you can. Maybe you'd try CPR. I don't know. I haven't seen the pictures yet. You haven't seen them either. We can't broadcast those pictures. Anyhow, that's going to be part of the argument. But then the other part of the argument is, well, if there's blood, it has to be somewhere. Take a listen to this cross-examination, because I don't think this is great for the prosecution.
You searched the house on the morning of, was it the morning of the 8th?
It would have been the afternoon.
Okay. And you went through the entire house?
Yes, sir.
And you looked at the tub, you looked at the showers, right?
Yes, sir.
What were you looking for?
Ammunition, weapons.
Blood?
If it was there, I was observant. We were looking for anything at that point.
Any evidence of clothing that would have blood on it or indicate it had blood on it or tissue? Anything that you saw in any of the bedrooms? How many bedrooms?
Several.
Several. You looked at all of them?
Yes, sir, I did.
Looked under the beds?
I did.
In the closets?
I did.
See any evidence of any clothes that had been involved in any sort of altercation that had left blood or tissue or brains? You see anything like that in any one of those rooms?
No, sir, I didn't find anything like that.
That's just not good, right? That's just not good. But let's get to the bottom of what's going on with this whole search and the way this crime scene was dealt with. Chanley Painter, let me ask you, where did they search? Where?
Well, she testified that the next afternoon, June 8th, that she being escorted by John Marvin, the brother, eyeballed the home. She walked through the home.
Walk through the home.
Bedrooms, closets, bathtubs.
Okay, Alex's home, right?
Alex's home, so the residence on this property, about 1,000 yards away.
Let me ask you this. Did they go to where Alex said he went that night? To his
mother's
house, where he drove to. I mean, I did the 18-minute drive.
Right.
Did they make that drive to look in that house?
They did not. She only testified about searching, just walking through the residence the next day.
Joseph Scott Morgan, you've been to these scenes. What you eyeball blood? How do you find blood? And what places should you be searching? Should you search all the places that the person who discovered the body and was with the people before they died, where he went that night?
Yeah, and you're going to look in typical, areas where people deposit clothing, obviously. Dirty clothes bins. Bathtub's a great place because sometimes people will actually take their clothing off and wash it in the tub. But we've got hard tissue as well. It's not just blood. We've got brain matter, those sorts of things. I think that, and really taking this out extensively, did they go in and remove the drain traps out of the sinks, down in the tub, all those types of places where you go and you seek out to find any kind of tissue that might be there, how extensive. And one more thing, I've got a real problem with them sitting in the car interviewing him in the car that night. Why in the world he was not taken down to headquarters immediately and sequestered at that location, not under arrest, but you got to take photos of him at that moment in time. You have to examine him very closely under great lighting conditions. And we see here, they went on and on and on during this period of time. It was, that kind of stood out to me. I've never seen them do something like this, particularly with an intimate. And we always look at intimates in cases where families have been murdered.
Lori, folks are real nice down here. My guess is there's not a ton of murders like this.
No, there are not a ton of murders like this. This is the first case like this that South Carolina has seen in my lifetime that I know of. Pee Wee Gaskins was our last serial killer, I think, but nothing like this, nothing intimate like this.
So is it could it be a matter of inexperience that we're just not used to going to these crime scenes and investigating people like this, perhaps?
I think it's part inexperience, but SLED is certainly experienced in dealing with crime scenes and interrogating witnesses. I agree with him that they never should have done that in the back of the car. I also think that John Griffin sitting behind him, Jim Griffin sitting behind him as his attorney, should never have let him speak. But
shh, stop. We keep telling suspects not to speak. They all need to speak. Otherwise, we don't get to the truth. The truth. Matt Harris, you're shaking your head. What's going on?
Yes. Title of the podcast, Impact of Influence. This is all about the Murdaugh influence. They didn't even search that. They let the family in the house that night, multiple family members coming in and going. The investigation you talked about just now was the next day. A lot could happen in 12 hours or whatever it was. They didn't go to the other property where the mom was. They didn't take Alex's phone for months. For months, they didn't take his phone. This is not totally inexperience. This is the impact of influence. The Murdaughs knew everybody. They knew them. You heard the testimony from the guy who checked gunshot residue, and not that he did anything wrong, but they're saying, hey, you knew Alex, right? You worked with Alex, right? You did, what do you? Yeah, sure. Hey, Alex, hey. And I'm not saying that the guy who did it, the gunshot residue was wrong. The point is that everybody knows the Murdaughs. You're going to tell me then you're a prosecutor, your other two there are lawyers. A wife and a son are killed. We know the husband is somewhere in the vicinity. And you go, we'll look at you tomorrow. How often does that happen?
Exactly. Well stated, well stated. Matt Harris, thank you so much. Joseph Scott Morgan, I know your time is valuable. We appreciate it. Lori Murray, great job. Great to see you. Chanley, tomorrow night, Chanley, you got to come down to Fat Jack's. Yes. Chanley's going back with the crowd. We're going to hear from the 13th juror behind us tomorrow night down here. So thanks so much, Chanley. All right, when we come back, we got another hour. We'll bring in our think tank and get to the bottom.